did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Hounds of Asher.
Hey everybody, welcome back to House of Asher. I'm your host Steve Asher, and we're all the way up on episode 78. We're slowly creeping up the episodes and getting a little bit more media, so that's always good. And you guys have been along for the ride, and I appreciate it. You guys have made it a lot of fun, especially those who have gave me great ideas for guests and gave me great feedback, and sometimes even that hard criticism that we all need. I know one of the biggest things they're always going, Steve, slow down. Slow down. You just breathe, man. You got to breathe. So, I'm getting really zen right now. Chill. All right. So, anyway, this is episode 78, and I don't interview a whole lot of ghosts. I started to say ghost hunters. Ghost-related folks in, like, the research thing. Just because sometimes it's sort of the same thing, and it's not that it's bad. It's just sort of like, how many ways can you crack an egg? And, so I just didn't want the shows necessarily to be kind of derivative or whatnot. But there's a time, and a time or two where you run across some folks, and it's sort of just by happenstance and just the way kind of synergy works. And I'd been on a show called Spooky South Coast back in, I think it was August, if my memory serves, and had met some pretty cool people and got to talking to them, and then learn about other projects like Tripping on Legends and things like that, which you definitely need to go check these both of these out. And the person that I'll be speaking to actually is a Mr. Chris Balzano, if I didn't butcher that name. Chris, are you there, bud?
I am. Christopher Balzano. Chris Balzano.
Balzano. Okay, so it sounds like a really tasty Italian dish.
Well, I'm glad that, because I've been called a lot worse. I'm a high school teacher, and so my name gets butchered a lot worse than that, as you can imagine.
Yeah. So what's the worst? Is it like Balzioni or something like that? Or they just like totally?
No, they just go with the balls.
It's just balls.
Yeah, just balls.
Man, I had
Mr. Balls or whatever, and I embrace it because at least they're remembering my name.
You're embracing.
So if they could just remember to do their homework, that would be even better. But what can you do?
But one-liners are so much easier.
They are. And it identifies me. I don't really care about it.
I will say this, and completely unrelated, so let's kill some time.
Okay.
When I was in school, I was the youngest brother of like 7 kids, and all my older brothers and sisters were kind of like hellions and stuff, and was always in trouble, and just, like sweat hogs type guys, just into crap all the time. And so the teachers, when I come along, they're like, oh, great, another one. So half the time I was called like asser or something like that, and I'm like, oh man, come on, you're educators, you're supposed to be better than this. But anyway, that's that. So it goes both ways. But I had some really great teachers. I was very lucky, especially some really great social studies teachers and history teachers, and even reading teachers. I hated reading. I still am dyslexic, and real bad about transversing my numbers and letters and threes into E's and whatnot. But there was one teacher she was really sweet, and I actually kind of had a bit of a crush on her, but she was really nice, and they helped me to slow down my brain enough to be able to read properly. And then once I did that, I was like, this is great, and boom, and I just really fell in love with reading, and especially things touching on the paranormal.
Right.
So if you can, just give a little preface as to who you are, man, kind of what you do, what's your trip.
Sure. Well, I've been doing this for a long time. I started in college when I was documenting in the hauntings and the stories about the hauntings, more importantly, in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm originally from Massachusetts. And over the course of time, it just kind of grew into a website, and the website grew into books, and the books grew into this and that and the other thing. And, I spent probably my first 20 years or so, or 15 years or so in this as an investigator, mainly because these things were fascinating to me, and I wanted to get out there and I wanted to experience them and prove them. Probably about the last 5 years or so, I left the field for a while, which is unfortunate because that's just about the time all my books were coming out. And Now what I'm doing is legend tripping. I have my own radio show called Tripping on Legends. And what we do is we go out there to these notorious places throughout Florida. I'm in Florida now. And we try to touch these legends that these communities are into. So over the course of doing this, I've done a lot of radio, and I've done a lot of writing and kind of maintained different websites over time, and really just kind of been with the ebb and flow of the paranormal over the past 20 years.
We know it's funny because I was going to start touching base with you on, because when you say like boom Boston boom, of course I think of like Wicked Awesome, stuff like that. But I'm not
I drop my accents for interviews, so
no, man, no, claim that. It's been so long since working in radio and stuff. You kind of, I don't know if you willfully pull back on the "Hey man, how you doing? It's good to talk to you" kind of thing, which is a very Western Kentucky sound. You kind of sound like Boom Howard when you get real fast, and But yeah, no, I think it's just part of that is too. Also, a lot of that's left here because once we started getting, especially television, and you would have, not just regional television. Then you would have people in Cincinnati, which is basically kind of a suburb of Kentucky anyway, because it's just so connected. But then you hear more Midwestern, then you hear New York feeds, and just slowly that regional dialect fades back. And
I think that I spent enough time in New Hampshire where we were constantly, even though it's one state away, the outsiders, that people made fun of my accent enough that I slowly lost it over time.
See,
and then
that's
when
what I hear
back
more.
To college, it all came raging out. So
no. See,
when I'm angry or excited, it definitely slips through. So you'll have to get me either angry or excited over the course of the interview to hear it.
So like you, when you go off, you sound like Ted Kennedy. More or less.
No, that's rich Boston accent. I sound more.
You didn't have the money for the accent. Oh God. Well, no, man. I mean, there's a guy named Dana Gould. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, comedian, and he does another. Well, I'm going to throw out another podcast just because I really like his podcast, Dana Gould Hour, and he has a show called Stand Against Evil, and he really is like a big horror nut and kind of a legends nut too, and I've actually tried to throw something out to him to get him kind of this way, but I think when he sees Kentucky, he just thinks it's going to be like nothing but red hats and racism or something, and I'm just like, dude, come on, man, come on. But yeah, I too, for a while, because you talked about taking a break, pulling back, I did that for a while too. I really had to do that, especially getting out deep into the investigative thing, because it was just sort of like, such when Ghost Hunters really lit up. And then everybody wanted a team, just kind of like now everybody kind of does some sort of podcast or webcast or vlog or whatever. There was so much noise. And then if you were anywhere near the same region, especially if there were guys that were kind of clowning and not doing proper investigations and, just gooning, just being goofy or going and defacing stuff or going into graveyards, effing around, and then you're like, no, that's not me. And then you're constantly having to apologize for other regional teams. Right. So
and for me, a lot of it had to do with, I was fortunate enough to start before the internet boomed. And so by the time people were really kind of leaning on the internet for a lot of research, my site was up and running. And so I became kind of an authority by proxy just because it was there. And I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed working with people. But I started to, when I was writing Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, which is one of my books, which is kind of like a how-to manual, I really started to do more research into groups, right? So I kind of became, for a while, more fascinated with groups that were investigating than actual investigating. And I started to, I'm not an advocate of paranormal groups. Like, I just don't believe that they should exist, personally. But that's just me. We can get into that if you want to, but
sure.
The what I was saying and what I was doing, and even working with Spooky South Coast, I think reinforced this because it's a great radio show and it has a great audience. And I was doing a lot of media for it, and what I was finding interesting was not aligned with what people were responding to. So I had put something out there that was really, really connected to my heart, and I really thought this was an innovative idea in the paranormal or something that should raise eyebrows, and it would get no response. And then I would put out a story about a random ghost picture, posted by the Daily Mail, and
thousands of likes.
100 people would like it. And I was like, this is not what I do. And I also became really, and we talked a little bit about this off the air, but I became really kind of discouraged by the focus on the scientific and the focus on the gathering and processing of evidence, as if that were the end-all be-all, as if there were questions that could be answered by what people were getting out in the field. And being in it long enough to say, I've seen a lot of people come around. I've seen a lot of really cool things. I've seen people who are pushing the edge, people who are approaching it from different ways and getting, different kinds of evidence and exploring that. And no one's stepping back to say, well, what does all that mean? Like, you can hear a voice on tape, you can see a thermal image, but no one's really talking about what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as people? What does that mean for us as communities and societies? And as I was trying to push that stuff, it was pretty much falling on deaf ears. So I kind of took a step back, being like, you know what? I really right now am not in tune with what's popular in the paranormal. And so why don't I just not do it for a while? So it wasn't really like, I know a lot of people are saying, oh, I watched too many of the shows and that got frustrating, or I was in a group and it was all fighting, so I just stopped doing. It was nothing like that. My love of the paranormal, my love of things that are unexplained never faded. It was just, I didn't think that mine was a voice that people wanted to hear anymore. And then I finally realized, it was like, well, you know what? I can't stop feeling this way and I can't stop creating, so I might as well see where my place in this paranormal landscape is. And that's what Tripping on Legends became.
Well, first of all, what's the thing of was it Churchill? Is it more or less, not that you had enemies, but like if you have someone that pushes against you, that means you stood for something.
Right.
An unpopular opinion doesn't matter if there's some sort of merit and
right.
sort of I'm losing the word, but academic quality to it. It's a thing of, you fall into a mold, and you fall into, everyone has to have the black shirt and has the anagram on it, and everybody has to get a big Jeep, or has to have this and that new pod or whatever, and those are really cool. The team that we have, I mean, we're not as active as we were, but just for the fact that I, like yourself, I pulled away from it. I wanted to research other things and stuff, but we used very limited electronic equipment. We even used dowsing rods, of all things, just because, why not? And that kind of ties in with some of the Southern heritage of using that sort of stuff for anything. Right. And I thought, why not? It'd be an interesting experiment. But you had, like you said, there was so much bang, bang, bang from different stuff, and it's sort of like, look, man, it's like Star Wars nerds and Star Trek nerds fighting. You're still nerds, man. Just
And I am both a Star Trek nerd and a Star Wars nerd, and a Ghost nerd. So. Well,
I'm also a Firefly nerd, so.
Oh, there you go. I was trying to explain that as my daughter was watching a series of unfortunate events that nope, that's Captain Malcolm Reynolds. You literally have a Popco of him in your room right now. Yeah. And I think, first of all, it wasn't that I was getting a lot of pushback. It was that no one seemed to care. So it was almost as if I would love it if they were arguing with me about it. And the other part of it is that I'm reminded of that quote from Seven. It's like collecting diamonds in the sand at the thought that you might be rescued. We were just gathering tons and tons of information and not processing it. It'd be like almost as if you were in a scientific lab, or you were doing something and you were getting all these results, and you're just kind of like, nope, what we need is more because we love getting data. I'm a high school teacher, and that's what we do, right? We gather data now. We're more data number crunchers than we are educators sometimes. And I'm so many times I get frustrated because I'm like, well, we're doing all this, but are we now applying it to the classroom? Like, if I have to do all this, can I apply it to the classroom? And oftentimes, it's like, no, we're just doing it because they say we have to do it. We're not going to actually pay attention to it. And that's kind of, where the biggest part of my frustration was. It was the casting aside your natural EMF meters and your natural cameras and your built inside you gut 2K meter or 5K meter, whatever those dang meters are called,
Right.
in place of something that was collecting all this information that you weren't using anyway. Like, what's the meaning of it all? And it oftentimes came down to the answer of, we need to establish, and I totally understand where this is coming from. We need to establish a reputation of being credible. And that reputation of being credible will then lead to people who believe. And the fact of the matter is, when you then ask those same investigators, which I did for that Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting book, what's going to convince people that the paranormal or the unexplained, any of these things are real, they all said personal experience. To an investigator, over 40 investigators I talked to,
Right.
each one said a personal experience, and yet they were spending all their time trying to establish the paranormal as a science to convince
Right.
people. And I'm like, we're really losing the heart of what's going on here. We're losing the heart of a haunting, and we need to kind of get back to that.
That, there's so many points that I totally agree with you on, and I'm kind of hoping we have one we can back and forth and go, no, I don't agree with that at all. But so far, we're pretty much on board together. Dang, man, you're running it for me. But no, it's a thing of when you use the term gut. Anybody that has dealt with any volatile situation, like say law enforcement or whatever, like myself, gut is huge. I mean, gut doesn't hold up in court, but
Right.
that split second, boom, what do you do? How do you react? What's around that corner doesn't feel right. I'm taking this other corner. Almost exclusively, if I didn't listen to my gut, it burnt me. And the heart of it, just like anything, you could have a person play a note perfect Tchaikovsky piece, and they have someone who maybe plays it and it's a little fast and dirty, but it's got so much more heart, so much more pathos to it. There's just you can feel that
Right.
gut, you can feel that energy, whereas the perfectly clean, sanitized, heartless version doesn't hit us because that's not us. I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, we have, if we want to quantify something, everybody wants to see the guy come out in the lab coat and the clipboard and say, well, this is what's going on, and they're going to listen to him. That's how we're trained. But
Right.
when the power's down and you're in the woods, you're going to follow your gut, or you're going to follow the person that you know's guts on it to go, we do not need to go this way. We need to pull back and wait. I know you're thinking you want to run down here. Wait a minute. And
Right.
then usually,
You used the phrase off air in relation to me, which I thought was hilarious. I always think the word debunk is a dirty 4-letter word. And I was experiencing a lot of, because I worked with a lot of groups, like that was my thing, is I attached myself, I saw what they were doing, I acted as an advisor. And I would be in these circumstances and people would say, nope, definitely nothing here. And I'd be like, yeah, but man, you can't toss aside the emotion of what's happening here. You can't toss aside what these people are saying that they experienced for something which ultimately we're not sure if what we do in investigating is answering those questions. We're not sure how this stuff works, if it's true. Like, it seems to be based on stories that we've heard and information we're able to get, but we don't know if that's the only way. And it's best kind of exemplified by a case that I had, which I never actually even met the person, but she had called me because of she had seen me on television. So she called me up and she was, desperate. And over the course of 2 years, I was able to counsel her and set her up with some people who helped her. But she was talking about, this horrible entity that she had in the house. And it was multiple things that were going on. It was affecting her daughter. It was affecting her marriage. And she had brought an investigative team in. This, if I ever wrote a book on a single haunting, it would be this one, because it's just so rich. But she was saying that, one of the things she was experiencing was puckwudgies, which we can kind of get into later if you want to, and which is what would draw her to me. And so she was, because the investigators wanted her outside the house. So she went out to the barn area and she was kind of, out there, smoking a cigarette and kind of watching inside. And they're going, very like scientific method-y, kind of going, systematically through the house. Now they're on this section. Now they're on this section. And she's watching them, and she can see their flashlights on the second floor. And on the first floor, she's watching these two dark figures walking through her house. One of which has like a small troll type thing on a chain. And they're going through the house, and he's kind of making the lights go out as he's walking through rooms, so he's in shadow the entire time. And so she runs into the house, and she says, downstairs, like, I'm seeing this thing downstairs. Nope, we're not into that area yet. We need to do this systematically so that we can prove that each room is in and find the heart of it. She's like, literally, there are monsters downstairs in my kitchen. And they were reluctant to go down, and she ultimately felt like they weren't listening to me. No matter what I said, because they had their agenda, they weren't able to kind of process what was going on in the house the right way. And that's kind of an extreme example, but it was a symptom of a bigger problem that I was having.
Right. Well, I'll say this: I'm definitely more of a Ray type investigator than an Egon type investigator. At this point, I'm probably more of a Vinkman. I'm slowly slipping into that because I've got so much more like entertainment related stuff on this on this show now. But
right.
hairless cats, weird, that kind of stuff. That's probably going to be the next episode. But it's a thing. But you know what? It's fun. So, but of when you go into that, like you said, and I understand setting up a grid, breaking it down, this is, and I understand going, okay, know where you're at, especially if it's a large area and you have a couple different teams going through different whatever. I understand that, but when you're dealing with a haunt or whatever it is, we're trying to put what we would consider a human construct of time and structure to something that's probably in fourth, sixth, eighth dimensional reality, and that's the thing that I freaking hate about Ghost Hunters. Not necessarily the show, but just Ghost Hunters.
Right.
That
and like you said, I understand that, and it's totally legitimate. It just wasn't my way,
Right. Well,
and I was getting tired of people saying a storyteller and researcher as if they were dirty words, and I'm like, they're really not. Like, you are. I mean, you can compartmentalize and say, when I am doing this or that, I am like totally like not trying to think of a narrative. But the fact of the matter is that people base the science of ghost hunting on stories, and people base what's going on in a place on stories, and the way that a haunting happens to them on a very predictable narrative structure. And so to not be a storyteller, to not do that was not my take on the paranormal at all. Mine was, this is stuff that's going on. Experiences should be shared. And storytellers do that, and researchers do that.
Well, and experiences are individual. It's a thing, and everyone has a certain perception, a worldview, a life history, prejudices of all kinds, be it good or bad, different exposures to different events and things that color your reactions to these things. And for a person to go in, which I absolutely can't stand. First of all, it depends on what you're doing. If you're checking out say an old mausoleum or something, there's not really any blowback to a family or whatever if someone's happened to walk past it and thought they saw something, and you go, no, I don't think it's haunted, which I think is insane with a visit. Right. If you really want to do it, you'd have to do that at various times of the day with different sort of stimulus and whatever. If you really want to try to claim that, but I don't think even if you research a place for a year, you could conclusively claim anything, because you don't know what that is that you're dealing with, unless it literally come down and gave you a long narrative and explanation. But when you deal with people who go into folks' welcome to Kentucky, folks' houses, when they go into folks' trailers and stuff that we have down here, and they're freaked out, I take it as you are there to, first of all, soothe these people's worries, unless you're just a jerk. It's not about numbers. It's about giving these people peace of mind. Once you can kind of get a loose idea that they're not just completely nuts, try to research it and maybe go, oh, I think you may be experiencing this and that. This and that. I've never told anybody, no, there's nothing here, you're nuts. But I think to either go, especially if they're having experiences, to go, there's absolutely nothing here. You're not having their experiences.
Yeah.
You have to weigh that. And the thing is, too, you can't any more than just say, yo, this is absolutely haunted because I've had an EVP or I had a this and that. That's so, it's sort of a deal where, and I've heard this about, different shows and stuff, and I think there's some truth to it. It's a little bit heavy-handed, but some of it's true. If you kind of kind of dig through it. A lot of times, they're not going to have a show. It's like, today on Ghost Watchers, they're going to unload all this equipment for 2 hours and get nothing, and then go to IHOP and go home and cry. That's not going to happen. I would love to see an episode of that. No one would watch it, but it would be real. But it's, there's so much, because it is an entertainment field.
Right. And the thing with us Tripping on Legends, and it's me and my co-host Natalie Christ, is that evidence to us, and whether something is haunted or not, is completely not the point. Like, if you're listening to us expecting us to certify anything as haunted or not haunted, don't listen to us. Ours is more about what are the stories, and we never do private houses. I did a private house around this time last year because it was a friend of mine. They wanted me to look into it. Other than that, we are tracking down ghostly legends from across the state, from around the state. And most of the time, by the time we get there, we've pretty much been able to say, here's how the story came about. Not whether it's haunted or not. But here's how the story came about. We can find kind of where the legend, where the folklore of this began. Then when we get there, it's a matter of trying to experience the haunting. And that's the major difference between legend tripping and investigating. Rather than trying to capture something, you're trying to experience it. And we've had some pretty insane paranormal type experiences on doing this. And then we've had places where they weren't, nothing happened whatsoever. And yet when we're able to then talk about it and break it down and kind of discuss it and analyze it, they're some of our best shows are things that we know nothing happened. And so, whether some place is haunted is not our primary focus. And when you do that, it really kind of frees you up because you don't have to prove something or disprove something. You just have to experience it. And what we've found is that by making ourselves open to the experience, and by, we were talking about gut earlier, by looking the signs. That's our two mottos on Tripping Our Legends. Which if we ever have a catchphrase, is the first one is, I'm glad you asked that, because that's something I say 7 or 8 times over the course of an episode. And the other one is follow the signs. And we were recording our most recent episode, which is all about, it's a question of why does Florida, but then the United States, why does it not have a lot of folklore associated with ghosts and Christmas time? And so over the course of doing different research for about 2 weeks on this, the signs were becoming ridiculous. Every time I turned around, something was connecting to something. I decided that I was going to, the very first thing I was going to ask Natalie when we sat down was, this was my segue into the show, what are your holiday traditions? And so I'm sitting down at her table at her house, and I'm getting ready. I'm getting the book, my research is all there, and I'm getting the recording equipment ready, and I'm thinking about what were my holiday traditions. And being Italian who doesn't eat fish, Christmas Eve was horrible for me because Italians have the Feast of the Seven Fishes, Right. And so I'm trying to think about what mine were, and I'm like, before we started having it at my house, my friend used to make the most disgusting thing of all time, and it was pasta with tuna. And I'm this is going through my head, and I look down, and there's a recipe book open right there on the counter, which is a recipe for pasta with tuna. And the two things were completely unrelated until that moment. And I'm like, what's this? She's like, oh yeah, my girls want to make that. I don't know. It's kind of what it sounds like. I'm like, that is my Christmas Eve tradition. That's what I remember about Christmas Eve, is trying to avoid the tuna fish pasta. And it's those kinds of things out in the field as well, or while prepping something, that kind of give us our direction. Because I'm a total believer in the paranormal. It's not, to me, I've had enough experiences and I've had enough happen and looked into things enough that whether a ghost exists, whether that kind of is parallel to us, or whether it interacts with us, to me it's a not even a debatable issue.
Right.
And one of those things is, where does the paranormal point us? You know, because I think that there are elements within the paranormal that push us certain ways, whether it's guardian angel type stuff or whether it's just kind of a bigger pulsating question that we're driven to. I think that the other side makes itself known through little signs like this, and we ignore them all the time, and that's when things kind of derail on us. And so Tripping on Legends, like, our primary thing is, you know, if you feel like, you know what, I need to go over there, that's where you go. Or if you feel like you're seeing a sign that says this is something that we need to look into more, you know, you follow your heart and you follow your gut and you follow your nose, follow the signs. That's Tripping on Legends.
Man, you know, it's so funny you were talking about the pasta and tuna. I don't know if you've ever been inside any sort of institutions or not, but they have a dish called Jack Mac, and it's super popular because it's super cheap. And they would put mackerel and noodles, and sometimes it depends. If, you know, if it was like a Mexican guy, he would put like chilies, maybe a little lime in it, or whatever, man. But they just put different stuff in it, and it's very kind of regional, and it's interesting. Everybody, again, like to the paranormal, brings their own seasoning to it and their own perceptions of it. And it's funny because you talk about, you know, the Christmas legends, you know, how America doesn't really have a lot of that. I mean, you look back at stuff like, I don't know if you've ever read the story, the Matchstick Girl. I don't know if you've ever, you know, the whole kind of falsy jawed thing, which is very common then. But you would think, like, say, like right here, this is a very agricultural area, so you would think people would be constantly seeing, like, young guys walking around with a shredded out arm or a shredded leg where he got caught in a thresher, or maybe in your area, I don't know if it was more kind of blue collar working class factory people, or if it was more a little bit more affluent. But, you know, maybe there would be some guy walking down the street, you know, mad, and, you know, I can't find the rest of my thesis, and you see him like walking in front of a truck and he disappears. Something like that. But
yeah, they don't. You know, it's funny because in researching them and looking into more, there were a lot of ones that I thought had taken place on Christmas or Christmas Eve because they were in the winter and they involved snow blizzards, trying to get back to some place, things like that. Or there were just elements of it that I remembered being Christmas, and I would go, oh, boom, there's a story I can bring up. And then I would read the story again, or I would look into it and go, nope, that didn't take place on Christmas Eve. That's in November, or that's in January. And you would think that, you know, because, and this is something we only touched on in the episode, you know, the true paranormal stories that involve Christmas, almost all are some kind of communication between loved ones, crisis apparitions, things like that. People reaching back to say where a present might be hidden, or to say that I love you and it's Christmas and we're not going to be together. And you would think with that kind of atmosphere and with the true ghost stories that are around Christmas, focusing on those kinds of things, it would make for very fertile ground for location-based ghostly hauntings. You know, like, oh, this is where, you know, the car accident happened because they were both drunk from a Christmas party, and every Christmas Eve the car is seen crashing. You know, you would be able to have those things, and the fact of the matter is that there really aren't a lot in all of America. You know, and I went several different routes. I went the Shadowlands type place where, you know, they just have story after story after story. I did keywording on other sites, and you know, the bigger question was, why don't we have that? And that's kind of what the episode, you know, this week's episode kind of explores.
Well, you know,
so I'm not going to tell you because then people won't listen to the episode.
No, totally. Yeah, don't tell me. Yeah, keep them on edge. Just give them a little bit, hook them.
Exactly.
By the way, if you want, give out your websites for those real quick. We're about at the 30-minute mark, so that way it's a good indicator for those guys to check it out here in a bit.
Sure. The best place to go if you want to just kind of keep up with what we're doing is our Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. But we also have trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. And, of course, the episodes themselves, all you have to do is go to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever you use, type in Tripping on Legends, and the episodes are going to come up. So you can subscribe to it.
That's awesome.
So those are the primary things.
Well, you know, you think about things like Halloween or something like that. There's always some sort of little whatever, something related to Halloween. That's very fertile ground for spirits. And I don't know, maybe if it's just a thing of that people connect, think, oh, well, maybe it would be sacrilegious or it would be this and that. But it's just like, I mean...
No, that's 100% part of the answer. Technically, yesterday was what was traditionally what took place on Halloween. And then as they kind of moved, this is part of the deal, but as they kind of moved Christmas to line up with the winter solstice, which was the most powerful paranormal day, those ideas got moved to Halloween. And so it has a lot to do with religion and kind of how we see and how we kind of say this is the time when religiously we should be thinking about this, but that's the time when we religiously should be thinking about that.
Right. Well, I have a decent amount of friends who are practitioners and have alternate faiths and stuff, and we were talking about Yule and the solstice and all that, and it is funny how it sort of did like a 360. Something about how cultures, it's weird that cultures dictate either how, if the hauntings are encountered at all, or maybe when we're open to it. Because I think, in the time of spiritualism, which, I kind of talked about, I forgot who I talked to about, but was saying, honestly, if I could go back in the days and meet like Dan Aykroyd's grandfather, who was like a huge spiritualist, and sit in and learn and study from those guys, I probably would, because I think they looked at it in a scientific way, but they went with heart first, and they went with what's the meat and the blood of it, what's really physically tangible, or whatever that sense is that we got, and we all have it. I think for whatever reason, like you said, there was a sort of a sterilization or a whitewashing a little bit of it, to where it's like, well, sure, we can talk about the star and leading, people to the manger, or it depends if you're, whatever faith you are, Islamic or whatever. Everyone has their time of year for that, this and that. But, I would be really curious to hear about, more about ghosts that touch on maybe like the Buddhist beliefs and things like that, because, we understand it's all reincarnation. I wouldn't think there would be any ghosts in any Buddhist faith. I mean, but there are ghosts. Like when I was in Thailand, we were adopting our oldest son, Joseph. We stayed over there for about a month because there was like a big political thing and everything was shut down and we couldn't leave. And I was lucky enough to visit a lot of these holy places and kind of haunted places and temples, and it's just it's a strange take. Like you said, I think too that their culture has such a different kind of look at it than Western culture, and it's just sort of. But then you talk to someone who is, Indian, and then they have a totally different vibe because it touches on Western and Eastern traditions too. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it also has to do with, and oddly enough, we've gotten EVPs back in my investigating days at the Samuel West House, which kind of reiterates some of what I'm about to say, which is how we behave as a spirit is also molded by who we are, right? So we have these kind of, with the way that we think of ghosts, and we think of ghosts in culturally or generationally in a certain way, well, that kind of molds people's thinking, right? And so if you then die and you are a ghost, you would act the way that you wouldn't act like yourself. You would act the way that people, or a combination of the way people perceive ghosts, right? So if your religious ideas are based on this idea, and a lot of this has to be, we're talking about spiritualism, was the rise of this idea of a good death, which came about at the same time, and the two influenced each other, which would be things like, the idea was put forward that you had to die a certain way to find peace. And so one example, we talked about this a few episodes back on my show with headless ghosts, that if you lost a body part and you were not buried with that body part especially, there was no way you would find peace. You would eternally be on search for your head, right? So imagine that you're a person that becomes decapitated and that's how you die. If you are conscious, if you have a consciousness after your death, you would have already been convinced that you're not going to find peace, and therefore you would be a ghost that would walk around looking for your head for the rest of eternity.
Shades of the Headless Horseman.
Hence the Headless Horseman and stories like that. And I think it's the same thing for the guilt that people carry over with them as well. Like they feel as if they have unfinished business or unworthy, and so they stay along. And so, ghosts influence us, and then we in turn influence the ghosts, and it happens kind of in a cycle. And it's one of those things where, maybe the sacredness and the idea of being saved in this season of forgiveness and the season of rebirth is, an idea that passes along to these ghosts. So we don't want to tell the stories because we want nice, cute Christmas stories, but also maybe ghosts just find this as a fun to find some kind of peace if their backstory takes place during the holiday season, so those stories don't get spread.
Well, it's so funny because the more you research like the history of like December 25th, I mean, we could do a whole show on Saturnalia and all the connections with Odinism and the Yule log and all the the symbolism of Christmas, good or bad, whatever. I just know it's a time the kids like to get presents and everybody eats really well. I don't put a lot of occult importance on it just because that's just me. But like you said, it depends on, like you said, it has to be on the culture, because if it goes exactly on the birthplaces of it, you would just have like drunken Roman ghosts and orgies rubbing up and down the street. It would just be so off the hook. It would be palatable for most people here. But I don't know. In the end, what does that say? Does it say that maybe ghosts are an extension of whatever, our collective consciousness, or is it maybe something even deeper than that? Maybe it's more your personal, whatever you got subconsciously is maybe what you tap into on the other side. Maybe that's why you're seeing whatever you're seeing. I mean, there's so many more questions, which I like, because I don't think there's really a way to just quantify all this.
And I think that it says something that natural and supernatural occurrences happen and we don't get it. And so we put it through a filter that we know. So if you're seeing some kind of light, like a ghost light type thing, and it's anywhere near a railroad, it has to be the ghost of someone who was looking, a railman who had died, and that's his lantern. Mm-hmm. Because you've heard that story, and you haven't heard the metaphysical explanation of da-da-da, or even maybe the scientific explanation of swamp gas. And so instead you fall back on the story that makes the most sense to you. Jeff Belanger is famous for saying, a house is haunted by the most famous ghost who have ever been there, by the most famous person ever been there. And I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing for haunted folklore, is that the backstory of any haunting is what is most familiar. And when you start to look at not whether something is haunted or not, but what are people saying about it, you start to see those kind of connections, that you have a thing like a spook hill in every state. And sometimes, like Florida, you have 4 in an area. Or you start to hear all these stories, about headless ghosts in certain areas. And you start to hear stories that have a lot to do with maybe the specific issues of a culture or of a society or of a pocket, but also these universal ones that are kind of, one of the things that we were working on really hard, I should say I was working on really hard, is this idea called the Haunted Love Project, which is how many of these hauntings, the backstory of these famous ghost folklore hauntings, has to do with love, and has to do with oftentimes unrequited love or star-crossed lovers who aren't allowed to be together, or sacrifices made by mothers, things like that, or two people who do something for each other, but revolving around love. And when you start to see is that it happens in our modern culture, it happens in our older culture, it happens in other cultures across the world, it happens in cultures that we eat up as Americans and as Westerners, in terms of Native American or places like India or Africa, that they then get kind of either influenced or they've had it themselves. And what you see is that we all fall back on what is either, depending on what we need, either most comforting or the best story, or what scares us the most, like what we're scared of. If you want to know what a culture is, look at their ghost stories, because it tells you exactly at any given time, in any given place, what those people were scared of.
Right. I mean, and that's, if you look at writers like H.P. Lovecraft and his kind of xenophobic aspects and stuff like that, or Spielberg, or sorry, Lucas. But I can touch on his too. But like the Nazi style elements of Darth Vader and the stormtroopers. I mean, it's right on the sleeve. I mean, it couldn't be more in your face. And you think about magic. Yeah, a lot of times people wanted a certain amount of wealth. That's one of the things I always go for: wealth, love, whatever, peace, whatever, that kind of thing. But there was these things that people were lacking. So it was sort of a really good tell on the character or the desires of that person. And like you said, you could probably tie love into a lot of those. And sometimes well, this guy went mad and killed his wife, or why did he kill his wife? Oh, he thought she was leaving him because he could not live without her. He loved her that much, even though that's a kind of a twisted love. To him, that was love. So,
right,
yeah,
and it's and it's the face of that love, how that love is manifesting. That kind of says a lot about different cultures. But like, I'll go back to the what do they say? There's only 7 stories. Well, there's only 7 ghost stories. But it becomes adaptable to your area because you too have that cliff where strange lights are seen, or you too have that bend in the road where the hitchhiker is seen. So it makes sense, but you can't explain it, right? You have no vocab for it, and especially if you're a person who is just your average kind of Joe driving down the street at 2:00 in the morning for some reason, and you see something which may potentially be paranormal. You're going to start to spread that story, and you're going to go through as you try to tell people about it. What it could be, and places get those kind of personalities. Now, the interesting thing is, I'm a full believer in that once these places get popular enough, and once there's enough good backstory and enough people are telling that tale, other paranormal elements tend to find those locations too because they know people are listening there.
Right, and that's the thing. Once, like you said, once you give a certain amount of attention to any project or whatever, it does seem like it kind of engenders or empowers it a certain element that can draw on that. And it seems like it's almost like you're paying homage to this. You're putting your emotions, you're putting your collective thought into it. And if something is beyond that, and something that's beyond our ability for understanding or comprehension, it kind of picks up on that. It's almost like like algorithms, but in a spiritual world. Who knows what they're working on.
It's the classic explanation people always give for why unexplained things happen to people who use Ouija boards, in that over the course of your average day, someone is more likely to use a Ouija board than they are to do a paranormal investigation because there's that quiche element to it. There's that, fun element to it. It's something that you did. You didn't go out and investigate a haunted sanitarium when you were 12. You and your friends got together and used a Ouija board.
Right. And
there was communication being made, whether it was, focused or whether it was just kind of kids playing around. And then that became the light that the moths came to. And so places that are said to be haunted, I think, really kind of feed off that reputation and allows other things. And I'm not necessarily saying because some place is haunted, then the demons all find it.
No, of course not.
There's maybe an element of that to it. And I used an element in big quotation marks in terms of elemental as opposed to demon, but. I think it has more to do with who's paying attention. The more you look at the paranormal, every step you take towards the paranormal, it takes 2 steps towards you. And I think when you become someone who has an experience, you then have more experiences. And I think the same can be said for location. Right.
Well, and I'll go one further, and this is just from my sort of spiritualist mindset. A lot of the kids, like you said, kids are going to play with the Ouija board. Kids' brains are extremely active at this point. There's a lot of hormones and this and that, and the brain is very active. It's growing, and it's all over, lit up like a Christmas tree. Sometimes some of the kids you talk to, you wonder if some of the bulbs are out, but still,
high school teacher.
There it is, preach. But it's one of these things that the fact that their electro-body chemistry, mind chemistry, is so wide open right now. I don't know how much of that energy, youth energy, can go into that to help kind of call things like that. Because we do give off electromagnetic signature. Every living thing has that. For me personally, if I had to say, okay, what do I think we are? What is the spirit? What is ghost? It all comes down to electromagnetism on a subatomic level. Guys like Tesla was tapping into that, and who's the guy that was working on stuff and he could make stuff like levitate and fly up to the ceiling?
David Blaine? No.
No. This was actually a guy. He had some kind of Weird Al looking hair. He was a scientist. I'm so sorry. He was on a Art Bell show years ago. But anyway, you see people playing with that, and that could be smoke and mirrors too. But when you have, I would be curious to see the numbers of how many of those stories, especially those primary stories, those patient one where like the ghost virus at that incident started, how many of that was like kids like, well, yeah, we were running around and, everyone has a place. We have a mausoleum in Princeton at I'll just say it, Cedar Hill Cemetery, and it's freaking creepy. And it has like a big iron door, and you have to kind of talk into it, kind of speak into it. Stupid, right? So anyway,
right.
But absolutely stupid. But a lot of kids would, sneak up there after night and whisper into it. And a lot of times it would echo back, but it would sound kind of twisted up, and it almost sound like somebody's talking back to you. And, I don't think there was necessarily anything paranormal about it, but I think the intent and the openness.
Big, yeah.
Yeah, intent is huge. And, that's just been one of those show us what you're made of kind of spots. It's more or less the come at me bro kind of thing of it. And,
right.
Hopefully as you age, you get out of that. But yeah, everyone's done that. I've done that. And I don't know how much of that is that way.
We probably understand that on some level, right? Because there are so many ghostly legends that we look into that have what I call the second generational spook factor, which is, and then this location, people came to it to test that. Like it was haunted, and then a great example would be like the Oviedo Lights near Orlando, Florida, right? And so people used to go there, and this was a huge thing. Like it was advertised in the local school newspapers and stuff like that. Oh, guess what? The math team is planning a trip to see the Oviedo Lights this weekend if you want to come. And so it was a huge like legend tripping event. And so people would go there, and then the next generation of stories involved, and then those people died, and now they're part of the haunting too.
Yeah.
And so, we were talking about that, like things imprinting and things kind of building on each other. And I think it's the same kind of thing. Like on some level, we understand that we become part of the story, and that we are feeding kind of this paranormal frenzy that are in these locations. And that part of that, like I said, is evidenced by how many of these haunted legends and how many of this folklore that we have involves someone looking into what is going on, and then they're becoming the next generation of haunting. So they're also there. It's going up the river to visit Kurtz.
Well, more or less, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then
right.
then people go, oh, well, see, of course, we told you, and that validates it. Of course, if you. It's just like looking for red beetles or something like that going down the road. If you start noticing them, they're all
bias.
That's it. If that's where you're triggered toward it and you're focused on, of course you're going to have that experience maybe on some level. But that's where you have to have enough critical thought to pull it back and go, okay, am I really seeing something in that window, or am I matrixing something that's reflective or whatnot? That's
right.
where you do have to step back. But if enough people seeing it and they're having enough experiences, then maybe you're saying, well, maybe the matrixing of that image is part of the haunting.
Right.
So,
or not, or just go out and have fun with it and be like, you know what, I just experienced something. I can't say whether it's real or not, but I can say that it touched me somehow. And I think that the paranormal needs a little bit more awe and a little less critical thought at times, because
right.
No one gets interested in the paranormal because of thermal readings through a camera. They get interested in the paranormal because they were at some place that spooked them out and they felt a chill.
Right.
And so we need to kind of touch back and enjoy the paranormal and be scared by it and be awed by it. And, if questions come up, think about them as and enjoy the idea that they might not be able to be solved, probably more than we've been doing in the recent past.
And that's okay. I mean, it's somewhere along the lines, in the advent of me coming into this, especially first starting a team and whatnot, I'm as biased, I had as much of this going on as anybody. There was a time where it was like, look, man, fun has nothing to do with this. We're trying to study this, and then it really turns into a drag. If you can enjoy yourself, have fun, be respectful. And still, right, have fun, man. I mean, life's too short. Just go out there and enjoy yourself, and try to leave the place. Like always, don't sound like a Boy Scout. Leave it better than you found it. Don't wreck the place. But sometimes you're not supposed to get all the answers, man. I mean, we're just here to experience it. Maybe all these things are to gauge how we are, to kind of to help us build a belief in something, because who knows, maybe we go across through the veil or whatever. Maybe it's like, okay, now it's your turn. If you want to, you can go over to whatever and kind of trip around, and you get to see these people go, oh my God, and freak out, and which I think would kind of be fun,
Yeah, and it's when you say that does have a very negative connotation in the paranormal community, but fun is different from being careless. So I would say that we've been in some places where retrospectively we had an amazingly fun time, but at the time we were very serious about what we were doing. We were taking what we were doing seriously, but fun, I guess, is not like running around hooting and hollering necessarily. Fun, it means that, being in the moment and being observant, and we had this great one called the mini lights. And you're supposed to say, mini lights come out tonight 3 times. We're in this location. Well, to think you can go there and be, overtly serious, looking into this very, complex paranormal legend that exists, and not have a little bit of humor in you, going like, I am standing in the bridge in the middle of the night, calling out to these, glowing ogres that are protecting a witch. To not find a little bit of like humor in that, a little bit of fun in that, and to look at each other across the bridge and go like, we're doing something absolutely ridiculous now, but you know what? People have done it for 2 generations, and so we're doing it because we want something to happen. We want to experience something. That is kind of the essence of legend tripping, like embracing both that serious side and that absolute silliness or ridiculousness about what you're doing and what some of this might mean. And that's okay. That's okay. As okay as being serious when you're doing it as well. You hit the key word as long as you're being respectful and your intent is good. Right on.
Chris, we're right at the end of it, man. I want to thank you for being on. What I will do here in a minute, I'm going to fade this out and say my goodbyes to the folks, and I'll talk to you off air in just a minute, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being on, having me on your show.
No, thank you for having me on your show.
Well, perhaps in the future, but
okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Mr. Chris Balzano, and excellent guy. Go to Tripping on Legends. Also, check out Spooky South Coast. But I want you guys to enjoy the rest of the day. Go out there and drink deep of the well of joy and whatnot, and enjoy your day. But as the sun sinks behind the trees and the shadows grow long, make sure to look in your closet, under your bed, out your back hallway. You never know, there might be some mini lights out there waiting to entertain you, or who knows what. But until next time, love one another, love yourselves. Don't be afraid to be a little scared, because there's knowledge and growth in that. So until next time, take care, everybody. God bless.